Today, I'm going to be talking about Peru, a country with really rich and complicated history that has shaped its culture today in a bunch of super interesting ways. We're going to be going through a few big chunks of Peru's past, starting with the Incan Empire, then the Spanish conquest, how things were during colonial times, and eventually how Peru became independent and how that has shaped its culture now, with how Peruvians live their lives today. First of all, let's start with the Incan Empire. So, the Incan Empire was actually the biggest empire in the Americas before the Europeans showed up. Founded in the 1200s, their capital city was Cusco, which they called the center of the world. And they ruled over a massive area, stretching across Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and even into Chile and Argentina. They didn't have a writing system like we know it today, but they did have a fascinating thing called quipus, which are knotted strings used to keep track of things like taxes and population. The Incas were also amazing engineers. They built roads that spanned 24,000 miles, suspension bridges, and stepped farming terraces that are still around today. One of the most famous Incan cities is Machu Picchu, which wasn't even discovered by the outside world until the 1900s. Their whole society was organized around labor, religion, and loyalty to the sun god Inti. Um, One thing about that is that the emperor, aka Sapa Inca, is commonly or was commonly considered to be a descendant of the sun god Inca. Moving on, even though the empire ended hundreds of years ago, the Incas left a pretty huge mark. A lot of people in Peru still speak Quechua, which was the Incan language, and you can see Incan influence in the way people farm, build houses, and even in how they celebrate holidays. In many rural Andean communities, people still work together in groups or for farming and projects just like the Incas did. You'll also see traditional clothing with bright patterns that go with the Incan times. So even though the empire itself is gone, the culture is definitely still well and alive. Moving on to the Spanish conquest. In 1532, when Francisco Pizarro and a small group of Spanish soldiers arrived, the Incan Empire was already struggling with a civil war, and European diseases like smallpox had hit before the Spanish had even gotten there, weakening the population. Pizarro captured the Incan emperor Atahualpa and demanded huge ransom, basically a ton of gold and silver. And while the Incas paid it, um, the Pizarro still killed Atahualpa. After that, the Spanish took over Cusco and started building their own society on top of the old one. It happened very fast and was honestly devastating for the Incan indigenous people. After the conquest, Spain set up the viceroyalty of Peru in 1542, and Lima became the new capital. Indigenous people were forced into a system called the encomienda, which basically meant they had to work for Spanish colonizers, often under very harsh conditions. The Spanish had brought Catholicism, their language, and their laws, and a lot of churches were built right on top of old Incan temples. But what's really interesting is that even though Spain was trying to replace everything with their culture, people didn't just forget their traditions. Instead, indigenous and Spanish culture started to blend, which became a big part of Peru's identity. And this leads us into cultural blending. This mix of cultures created a whole new way of life. People began speaking Spanish, but they kept indigenous languages too. Catholic saints were sometimes celebrated alongside Incan gods, and new art styles and music came out of this cultural fusion. Even the food started to change, mixing local ingredients with Spanish cooking styles. So, while colonialism was definitely a hard and painful time for the Incan people, it also created unique culture that still exists today. Peru eventually got its independence from Spain in 1821, thanks to leaders like Jose de San Martin and Simon Bolivar. After that, Peru became its own country, but like a lot of places, it took time to figure out how to govern itself. There were wars, revolutions, and political ups and downs. Today, Peru is a democracy with over 34 million people. It has a lot going for it: beautiful geography, strong tourism industry, and valuable resources like silver and copper. But there are still problems too, like governmental corruption and poverty in some areas. Still, Peruvians are proud of their country, and it's a mix of cultures: Spanish, Quechua, and Amira, which are all official languages, which shows that indigenous roots are still respected. Today, Peru's culture is super colorful and energetic, especially when it comes to music and dance. In the Andes, you've got traditional styles like huayno, which mix flute, drum, and string instruments. On the coast, there's marinera, a romantic partner dance with fancy handkerchief waving. And there's also Afro Peruvian music, which came from African slaves during colonial times and brings a whole new rhythm to Peruvian culture. You'll hear instruments like the Cajun, which is basically a box you sit on like a drum. Every region of Peru has its own dances and sounds, and people celebrate them year round in festivals. So, talking about Peruvian food, dishes like ceviche, which is raw fish with lime juice, onions, and chili, and lomo saltado, a stir fry and beef onions with tomatoes and french fries. These are super popular. There's also the aji de gallina, which is a creamy, spicy chicken stew. Peru has also won awards for being one of the best food destinations in the world, with chefs like Gaston Acurio helping put it on the map. On the art side, there's beautiful textile work in the Andes, handwoven with bright colors and detailed patterns. You'll also find things like pottery, silver jewelry, and paintings that reflect both indigenous and Spanish influences. So, with all of that said, Peru is more than just an old civilization or a vacation spot. It's a place where ancient traditions and modern life mix together in a really cool way. The Incas built a legacy that hasn't disappeared, and even after colonization and years of change, the culture has stayed strong and unique. Whether it's through food, music, festivals, or language, Peruvians carry their history with them every day, and that's what makes Peru such a special place. Thank you for listening.